Hello there, this is Thomas, and you've stumbled upon the Zarbo Audio Project's YouTube channel. Welcome to my latest creation, a Bluetooth radio in 3 flavors. Every project starts with a why. Why do you want to build this? Well, this project has actually 2 whys. I have a friend at work with a super cool daughter who just loves music, and I thought it would be fun to build her a music playing machine. Mom said she loves anything related to the beach or seashore, so I went with a seashell stencil paint job along with shell speaker grills for hers. Those were 3D printed. The second radio was for a delightful young lady that works at our local Taco Bell, believe it or not. She kind of adopted my wife and I as her people. I don't know how to describe it other than she's always been super nice to us, and we've just sort of connected with her on some level. She's a crazy hard worker. I literally was in there one Sunday after church and saw her almost running around trying to get every order filled while they were short-handed. She smiled the whole time too. Amazing. Anyway, she just graduated from high school, and my wife and I thought it would be cool to give her a little graduation gift. Some people just deserve that kind of stuff, And the third one, well, that's for us for the time being. It was the prototype, you could say. Anyway, the dimensions for all 3 are basically the same. 18 inches wide, 10 inches deep, 6.5 inches high. The base is 12.5 inches wide, 7.25 inches deep. And I 3D printed an angle piece, actually 2 angle pieces, that raises up the front of the radio by a nice angle. Here are the dimensions for the inside compartment, made out of 1/2 and 1/4 inch MDF. I separated the left and right and created a little enclosure for the electronics to live in. It's not a small enclosure, but the sound is impressive. It's fairly flat from about 50 hertz up to 16K or so. I wasn't planning on making a video on this. I don't have any footage of me cutting the boards out. It probably would have looked something like this. But I can show you basically how it went together. After cutting all the panels and dry fitting everything together to ensure that the panels are indeed the correct size, I glued up the interior partition assembly. First, the amp sub enclosure. Then the rear partition panel that separates the left and right speaker volumes. I decided to create the openings for the drivers as well as the preamplifier head unit before gluing the enclosure together. It's easier to tackle this now while the panel is at a more manageable size. You can see the 45-degree chamfer I put on the inside of the driver opening. This allows for better airflow on some drivers. Also, before gluing in the amp sub enclosure, I wanted to create a way to mount the amplifier inside the box. So I designed this nifty little amp mount with built-in standoffs, which attaches with 2 1/2 inch panhead screws. I actually designed a few different amp board mounts, one with provisions for a time delay relay board, but that didn't work out unfortunately. Keep watching to find out why. I also drilled out holes to run wires inside the cabinet before gluing her up. I used Gorilla Glue to secure the interior partition and the sides, back, and front to the bottom piece of 1/2 inch MDF. Then clamped it with a piece of wax paper on top so that my top wouldn't stick. I would glue the tops on in a separate operation. You can also see some additional holes here and there, and you'll see what they are for shortly. So here's where things start to deviate a little. I have 3 basically identical enclosures, but each will be finished in a slightly different way. 2 will be painted, so I need to round some corners on those, design some grills, as well as a way to attach those grills to each cabinet. 3D printer to the rescue. It really makes life easy in so many ways. The shell grills are actually 3D scans of an actual shell made by someone named Dinosus on Thingiverse. I stretched them to the size I needed and added holes for the sound to pass through. And I also designed some little standoffs to create some distance from the driver. The other grills I designed myself. First time I've ever done that. And I kind of enjoyed the process. It's really fun creating things to print on your 3D printer. I rather enjoy it. I use Tinkercad for that. And I think they came out pretty good. Painted those as well. Here's a look at the base. The bottom is 3/4 inch thick, and the 2 3D printed angled risers go from about 1 inch high in the front to about 1/4 inch high in the back. It helps the sound project into the room a little bit better and actually improves the looks a bit too, I think. The wooden bottom, I just did a little bevel on it with the router and then painted it with Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch paint. It covers well and dries fast. I like it because of that. You might be wondering how I got the paint job on the two painted ones. Well, basically, I sealed the MDF enclosure with bin shellac-based white primer. Then I added a beige base coat, and then I sort of just graffitied these cabinets with these lighter pastel colors. For the ocean-themed enclosure, I also used these seashell stencils that I got from Amazon. Basically place them wherever they look good on the cabinet and then hit them with a quick blast of one of the paint colors. It was actually fairly easy to do. Once I liked the look I had, I hit everything with some glitter spray, then a few coats of clear to lock everything in. Time to get the electronics buttoned down. I mentioned that I made a few amp mounts, one of which was supposed to house a tiny time delay relay board that was supposed to allow the preamp to control the power to the amplifier via the preamp's onboard voltage output. In other words, turn the preamp on with its remote control, and it would also turn the amp board on as well. I cover all this in the review I did of this preamp, which I'll provide a link to, but in the end, it didn't work, and I ended up needing to use a good old-fashioned power switch to turn the amp and preamp on all at once. I also installed a few round vents called soffit vents to allow any heat that might build up from the amp in this small cavity to escape. I 3D printed some other doodads as well, a round screw-in mount for the switch, and a round panel to mount the DC input jack, both of which made it easier to mount these components in the 1/2 inch thick MDF that I created the cabinet out of. I also 3D printed the vents as well. I recessed them and I just hot glued them in place after the cabinet was completed. Well, we're getting near the end. We've got 2 out of the 3 units finished, but I wanted to do a veneer finish on the remaining unit. I ended up going with this nice Babinga Cavazinga veneer from veneersupplies.com. Not cheap, but pretty cool looking. But before I can apply the veneer, I need to install some small neodymium magnets on the front because I'm going to install grills on these. If you want to get up to speed on how to do slick speaker grills using magnets as the attachment method, I'll leave links to a few videos I've done on that topic, but before I can install the magnets, I first have to create the grills, which as you can probably guess by now, I created with my 3D printer. They have recesses to accept the dowels that secure the magnets, and also have a ridge printed on the back to make the grill cloth easier to trim after it's applied. I use these dowel centering pins to locate the center of the holes to be drilled to mount the magnets into the cabinet. All it takes is a little pressure. That leaves a nice mark to easily drill out the holes on the enclosure and epoxy in the magnets, being careful to keep polarity constant. Next, I epoxy in the magnets on the grills, and there you go. Done. I'll fill in what's left of the magnet holes with some Bondo filler, and then I'm ready for veneer. I use the iron-on method of attaching the veneer. I've used this technique for almost 2 decades, and it's a pretty much foolproof way to do it. I took the trouble to match the front and top veneer sheets to get those continuous grain lines front to top. Sexy, right? A little painter's touch flat black paint on the bottom, and we're ready to put her together. The drivers for this project are from Parts Express, the Dayton Audio DMA105-4, which is a 4-inch full-range driver. The amp is also from Parts Express. It's a TDA 7492 based Class D chip amp advertised at 50 watts per channel. It is a clean sounding amp that I've used at least a dozen times or so. I've already mentioned the head unit. That is an Ally Express part. Well, the 2 painted units are already with their respective people, but I can run some sweeps on the one that is staying with us. First I'll do a regular short sweep, then I'll mic up close to the vent to see what that's contributing to the overall output. That's not bad at all. Now let's add in the output from the vent. Alright, get you a look at that. Here we've got 100 hertz. We got 50 hertz right here, and then we're starting to take a dip. But we've got something in the vicinity of a reasonable output down to, I'd say 45 hertz, 45, 50 hertz, something like that. There, looks like decent output from just a bit below 50 hertz to almost 15K. Not bad for a pair of $20 each 4-inch drivers.